coffee shop in a city, which is every coffee shop in every city on a day, which is every day. Hello, friends, and welcome to the 15th episode of Barista Unfiltered, a podcast dedicated to the life and times of baristas. They tell us what's brewing in their lives and work in this free-flowing and unfiltered podcast. I'm Jodie Lee.
And I'm Austin Miller.
And today, our guest is AJ Berge. Am I saying your last name right?
It's close. Berge.
Berge. AJ Berge.
It's a little bit of a mouthful.
And at Otis in Lafayette, Colorado. Welcome to the podcast, friend.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. First thing we want to know is, and I know you got coffee on your desk, so tell us what kind of coffee you are drinking this morning.
I'm drinking a pour over that I made in my kitchen of some Ethiopian coffee that was roasted in Seattle.
Okay, so I have questions.
Yes.
I hear that term pour over, and I have no idea what that means. Can you describe what a pour over is?
Yeah, totally. It's there's a whole bunch of different devices and ways to do it, but at its core, it's just about making one cup of coffee at a time. You usually get a device that's either conical or somehow kind of drips down to the bottom. You put your ground coffee in the bottom of this filter in this little cone device, and then sort of pour water very laboriously over it and let it drip through, and probably takes about 3 or 4 minutes, but it's kind of basically a way to totally control all the variables of the coffee you're making and make a very specific desired amount for yourself or for you and a friend. So
when you're using the pour over, is the water hot or cold?
Hot. Although you can do, typically it's hot. You can do like iced versions of it, but you'll still use hot water, and then you'll kind of brew it into a pot of ice, and that'll cool it down. But yeah, coffee extracts best when it's 195 to 205 degrees.
Okay.
Are you super strict about your temperature controls when you're at home?
It depends on the day. It depends on how tired I am. My roommate has this cool kettle that has a thermometer built into it. So that makes it really easy that you can just look exactly where it's at and have really good control over it. But I'd say I'm 75% of the time I'm pretty accurate with it.
So are you measuring, like, if you're not using the thermometer kettle, then are you measuring it your own self with a thermometer?
If I'm not using a kettle with a thermometer, I kind of just go off the cuff and take it straight off the boil and then just go for it. And typically that's around 202 degrees. So unless I have all of the specific gear that makes it easy, I don't get super nitpicky about it.
Well, tell me about the coffee from Seattle. Is there a particular brand that you like?
Well, yeah. So what I'm drinking now is actually roasted by my old job. It's where I was working before Otis. They have this cool thing where when you leave the company, they give you a free year subscription to their coffee, which is super sweet. I think there's 4 bags of their coffee on the counter right now because it's like I can't drink as fast as they keep sending it to me. So it's kind of nice that I get a little selection in the morning.
Oh, it's like old times too, like drinking in the old times.
Yeah, and they'll like write me little notes in the packages sometimes. So it's very cool. It's cool to like stay connected to those guys. That's
precious. What's the name of the coffee shop?
Seattle Coffee Works.
I don't know if I've been there. Is it famous?
They have some notoriety, and in the past 2 to 3 years, they've kind of gained more attention. I think they kind of opened 2 cafes within a year. That was probably 2 years ago, and they have sort of a unique niche in the Seattle coffee market, I guess. Their first store is like right by the Pike Place Market, so there's a lot of tourist traffic that comes by there, and people who work at the market and stuff like that. So I would say in the Northwest, it's a little bit more well known, but they're still trying to get a foothold in the rest of the country.
And with having all that extra coffee around, how do you store it?
I store it in bags on the counter, unsealed, very unscientific.
That sounds like my house.
Really? Yeah.
Which is better than what some people do. They think they need to put it in the freezer or the refrigerator.
I've heard that.
Not a good idea.
Yeah, I don't know how that started or who created that trend, but I've never successfully done that myself.
Okay, what happens if you do put it in the freezer? I don't, but what happens if you do?
Have you ever put baking soda in your freezer?
No.
To soak up the odors. So apparently coffee like works kind of like baking soda does. So it's taking in whatever is in the freezer or the refrigerator, wherever you store it. So you're basically like tainting the flavor of the coffee with whatever it's in there with. It also does weird things with like the moisture from the refrigerator or the freezer. So people think they're preserving it that way. But the best thing to do is exactly what he's doing, as long as it's in like it's in a container that is not being exposed to sunlight. The best thing to do is just leave it out room temperature.
Okay, so we put ours in. If the bag, sometimes people sell you coffee in bags that you can't really secure again, like not well.
Oh,
and,
right.
Like where you have to cut it to open it, like you can't curl it back on itself easily. So when we're in a situation like that, we put the beans in like a glass container with a screw top lid in a cabinet so that they're not in the sun. That's the right thing. It's a good thing. We're getting a gold star.
Nicely done. And points for the display with the nice glass too. That's the best.
Right. Well, we have this whole like little cabinet in our IKEA kitchen that it's like it rolls up in itself. We call it the coffee hanger because it's like a hanger for an airplane,
Nice.
but there's only coffee in there. So anyway, so I use a mocha pot. Are you familiar with the mocha pot?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so what I have observed, I've used lots of different coffees in it, and I just use a kettle that doesn't have a thermometer and just sort of wait for it to start hissing, and that's when I use the water. It's just barely boiling if it's boiling. But I have different results per batch of beans, and I am using the same setting on my burr grinder. But sometimes it rolls through faster and it's thinner, and sometimes it's like that really thick caramel kind of substance. What advice would you give to somebody who's trying to work with that? Like, what do I need to be doing differently to always get that caramelized sort of coffee to come out of it?
That's a good question. My experience with mocha pots is pretty limited. At one point I had a roommate who had one, so we would break it out every once in a while and use it. I think it's fun. I found it to be similar. It's challenging to get a consistent cup out of it and to have it be reliable every single time that it's going to be. I think the point is it's supposed to be close to espresso, right? Like it's supposed to be syrupy and rich and really thick. And there's some days where it was perfect and some days where it was not even close, right? But
yeah,
my advice is always just like trying to keep your variables as consistent as possible. So the amount of coffee you're putting in there, making sure that that's consistent every time you do it, keeping your grind setting consistent, water temperature. And then beyond that, I think you're kind of at the mercy of the mocha pot gods in some ways.
It's true. Do you think I should be using like 200-degree water?
Yeah, that's usually what I shoot for.
That's usually okay. I'm going to start working on that. Well, I
do
don't know if
wonder
I have
the
a thermometer.
bean that you use, like you're switching beans a lot too, right?
Yes.
So definitely take note of which beans work the best, because there might be, I don't know, because I haven't used one very often either, but I wonder if that variable is going to matter.
The beans I like the best in it are the Piedmont espresso blend from Jodie that I can't ever get. You can't order it online. You have to like be in town to get it, and they have to have it available.
Is that in Colorado or the East Coast?
No, it's in Chapel Hill. It's where Austin and I know each other from. And I think the reason that I have that dialed in is because that is the coffee I have run through it most frequently. But I figured it out first. And so now I'm trying to apply it to, we tried Stumptown. Proper coffee is really good too. Otis coffee now. But I've only bought one Otis bag, because people just keep giving me coffee, and I keep traveling and picking it up from different places. So I'm about to be out again to a place where I can try Otis coffee again.
Oh, nice.
But yeah, I like to try all kinds of different coffees now.
Yeah.
And I think it was maybe it was Jake that I was talking to when I first got my mocha pot. And I said, so, the mocha pot is supposed to be like espresso. Do I have to use the espresso style bean at Otis? Because, they'll have like 5 or 6 different bags of coffee. And he's the one who told me, no, you can use any of these. I didn't know that. I thought you had to use the bean for espresso to make espresso.
Yeah.
So maybe there's somebody listening who doesn't know that either. I don't know. I'm learning so much just having this podcast.
That question comes up all the time at my work. People come in and they think that, there's something different about the espresso, but really it's just usually what it is. If you go into a lot of coffee shops, they have a blend that's sort of formulated for espresso, but that doesn't mean it's any different. It's just what the coffee shop decided tasted really good in the machine, and they're sticking to one kind. And now a lot of places, they'll give you a choice of different things that you can use, and there's like more people doing single origin rather than blends. So and they're playing around with like roast levels and all that kind of stuff. So it really doesn't matter. It's just that was kind of a convention. I think like the house espresso roast was what the house decided on, because they only have one grinder and they wanted to feature that all the time, right, and be consistent.
Yeah, I guess we're getting back to that. Like, what can you make it happen easily, quickly, reliably, consistently, and that's what ends up being your espresso blend.
And that's what Spikes does. Where I work, we have one espresso roast. We don't switch it around. So we're really consistent with that. But then there are a lot of other places in the city where you can actually like go in and choose which espresso you want. You got to have a lot of space and a lot of grinders to do that. But that, we don't have that.
Well, okay, Here's another technical question for you. Do you need to clean your grinder like between beans, or can you just let it grind in between?
I think cleaning is important. I don't think it necessarily has to be in between every time you use it. I typically will take out the burrs on my grinder and clean them once every 2 months, something like that. And that's just brushing them off with a little brush and kind of wiping them down with a paper towel, just a dry one, just to get any sort of like residual oil off of the burrs, stuff like that. And then just cleaning out the hopper, things like that. But it does not have to be every time you use it, cleaning it every time. Yeah. Or if you're super into it, you can clean it out after you get a new bag of coffee. So you clean out all the coffee grounds and the oils from what you're using the last time. So you get a fresh taste of whatever your new bean you're using is.
I do clean the thing that the grounds go into. So, hey, I do that every time.
That's something.
Doing something right. So, like I said, AJ does work at Otis in Lafayette, where we've had lots of baristas from that coffee shop on our podcast. I don't know a whole lot about AJ, even though I've been a proper it was Proper Grounds, and then it was Proper, and then it is Otis. So when I talk about that coffee shop, I'm talking in 3 terms usually, because I remember the evolution of it. But it is now Otis, and shortly before it came Otis is when I met AJ. So I'm a morning coffee drinker. So there are whole populations of people that exist in that coffee shop world that I do not know, because they're coming in at times I'm not there. So AJ, I don't know how long you've worked there. I don't know what your story is with that coffee shop and how you became the manager. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about all that.
Yeah, totally. So I got hired at what was Proper Coffee and Cocktails at that point in the end of June 2018. So a little bit over 6 months. I just moved back to Colorado from Seattle. So I'd started my career in coffee in Seattle and worked there for 6 years, and then moved back to Colorado, which is where I was from. And I got a job at Proper. I'd actually worked at Proper Grounds back in 2012 for a summer. So I had just gotten my first coffee job in Seattle, came back home from school for a summer and worked with Cody for about 3 months, and then went back to Seattle. And then moved back here 6 months ago, and knew that they needed additional help at Proper, and then kind of applied, got the job, and come to find out the manager was leaving like 2 weeks after I got the job. And I had management experience in various capacities at other shops I worked at. So kind of figured like the timing was, I guess, serendipitous, and I just kind of went for it. Yeah.
Excellent. Were there other people on staff that also wanted that management role?
I don't think so.
You just had your hand up like, ooh, me.
Yeah. I think I was just the most enthusiastic.
Yeah.
So, and then it changed to Otis probably 3 or 4 months after I started that. that phase of the job. Yeah.
All right. So then I met you right about the time you started there, this iteration.
Yeah.
As the manager. So tell me, what got you interested in coffee, like back in the Seattle days? Is that when you first got started in coffee?
Yeah, that was my first coffee job, was in Seattle. I'd been drinking coffee since I was probably too young. We used to get like decaf frappuccinos and all that kind of stuff at Starbucks when I was a kid. And yeah, really enjoyed it, but didn't ever know that there was anything outside of the world of Starbucks and like bigger corporate coffee companies. And then when I went to Seattle for the first time for school, I remember ordering a macchiato in a cafe, thinking that it was like a caramel macchiato, like a Starbucks, that thing. And the guy hands me like the little tiny cup. And I remember being so confused and tasting it. And it was not what I was looking for, or thought what I was going to get. And yeah, I think that started this curiosity that there was this whole other side of it that I didn't know about. And there was an appreciation for it that extended beyond what I felt like Starbucks was doing. So then being in a city like Seattle, I just started going around and trying different places and exploring different shops, different roasters. And yeah, I eventually landed a job in that same cafe where I had that first macchiato. So that was my first coffee shop job.
And what's the name of that coffee shop?
It's called Cafe Ladro. So it's like a local Northwest chain. I think there's like 14 or 15 in Washington. Yeah, it was a cool place to start out with. Just being a bigger company, there were more resources, they were more established. So there were kind of really built-in training systems to follow and protocols that had been made up. And yeah, it was a really good team, really good environment. And I did a lot of work by myself. That was sort of our store's deal, was you did a lot of your shifts on your own, which I think was a really good way to learn and a good way to kind of throw yourself into the deep end of doing everything during your whole shift. So yeah, very informative experience.
And since you had exposure to all aspects of like running a coffee shop, did you sort of naturally gravitate to one or two things you really liked doing more than others?
Yeah. I think during that phase, I really was into being on the machine. That was sort of what drew me in initially. Was I loved the idea of kind of losing yourself in the flow of the drinks and getting really good at being quick and efficient and making your espresso consistent, your milk texture and temperature. But ultimately, I found that at that space, I really liked the customer service aspect of it. I liked that I was kind of given my own free reign to take care of people how I saw fit and keep the store in shape and clean. And yeah, I liked the sense of autonomy that I think came with that job, and kind of ultimately gave me the skills to be successful at the next couple places I worked at too.
Did they have benefits there?
Not for like entry-level baristas, which was fine. I was still in college at the time, so I was doing that part-time with school. So I wasn't trying to be a full-time barista or anything. But I think, I don't remember if they did for full-time people, but I would assume they had some sort of benefit package for people who worked 40 hours a week.
Yeah, it must have been nice, like, to sort of relieve yourself from the rigors of study and just get into this flow state with coffee.
Yeah, it's a good break from reading for sure. Is a very different sort of way to work your brain, I think.
Yeah. What did you study in college?
I have like 85% of an accounting degree that is still, we'll say, to be completed at some point. So yeah, didn't quite make it through the finish line, but.
Did you love accounting?
I did at the beginning, and kind of the process of school was a process of realizing that it's just like, I think for like everybody, it's a process of coming into your own and realizing who you are in certain ways. And there are parts of it that I liked and parts of it that when I got to sort of the upper level stuff, I realized I really didn't like. And I started to do interviews for like accounting firms and thinking about taking the CPA, and kind of realized that this was not the direction I wanted my life to go. And yeah, so I left school, and then that was when I jumped on board with Seattle Coffee Works.
Were you finding it easier to focus on your work life than your school life?
Yeah, it was more pleasant to be there. It was like,
Yeah.
that was what I wanted to do, was to go be at the shop and help people and serve people and make coffee for people. And it was like, and I'm sure everybody feels this way in college, or some people, but it was such a bummer to have to come back and start doing income tax reports and financial statements and all that stuff, that it was, yeah, it kind of got to me in the end.
So now that you're a manager, there must be some accounting aspects to the work that you do currently.
There is a little bit, yeah, which is interesting that has sort of continued to follow me along the path a little bit, and has made me grateful that I have some of that experience and that knowledge. But it's not, yeah, I wouldn't say it's accounting heavy or numbers heavy, but I think accounting taught me like kind of the language of business, I guess, if you want to say it like that. And I think it's given me a different perspective on this managerial job. So I am thankful that
I think it's easy when you've had some background in a topic, and then you go to a job that incorporates it. It's easy for you to go, yeah, well, I mean, it's not really accounting heavy. But to a person that has none of that education, what you're doing seems like an insurmountable task to them. Right? But it's something that you have experience with, and you're so familiar with it, it's really not a big deal at all to you. But I see my husband say this all the time. He has an MBA, and he's like, this is a wasted degree. I'm like, you're using it all the time.
Right.
And he has knowledge that I don't have because I never went through that school. But I think accounting is it's one of those things, if you study it, there will be applications in your life, in your personal finances, and, whatever business you end up in.
Oh, sure. Yeah, it's very practical.
Yeah. But I can totally see how you needed to, bounce out of that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So we heard about your first barista job. Tell us about that community. Was it mostly students you were serving, or, people in the neighborhood nearby? What was that like?
So it was, there were a lot of students. It was probably a mile and a half to 2 miles from my college campus. In a neighborhood in Seattle that's historically pretty wealthy. So it's one of the more high-end, higher-priced homes, stuff like that. So it's very beautiful, but it's on this gigantic hill, basically, which is Seattle's just a bunch of hills. And where my shop was at the very top of this hill, kind of in this cute little stretch of shops and businesses and stuff like that. So it was an interesting community for sure. Some students, a lot of people that had been living in that neighborhood for, 30 to 50 years, right? And it was interesting stepping in as this kid from Colorado and just sort of being inserted into this community that had a lot of history and a lot of continuity behind it. But everybody there was super kind, very sweet. They really loved the shop that I worked in, so they were enthusiastic just to be there and to meet somebody new that was working there. So yeah, my customer experiences there were awesome. Everybody was very.
How are the tips? Did they tip you a lot?
Not as much as you would expect. When I say like, ooh, it's the wealthiest neighborhood in Seattle, it wasn't like I was walking away with hundreds of dollars. But there was a woman at Christmas who would, every year, we always like hung up stockings for the whole staff. I think she put like $100 in each of our stockings. Like consistently, she did that. So
wow,
that was like a nice little Christmas perk, I remember.
That is nice. Have you ever gotten a tip like that, Austin?
I've gotten a lot of things that I would either consider tips. Like, there's like some people who won't normally tip and then they'll drop it all at once. So like they'll, come in one day and just drop a 20 in the tip jar for everybody. But most of the things that I've gotten have been like, gigs, like people giving me the end on a side gig or something like that. That I would consider a tip because they were helping me out in that way. And we also at Spikes, we get pretty good tips just because we're really busy.
Yeah. So you get enough people in there, there's money in the jar.
Oh yeah.
Okay. My next question about tipping. If you have a $5 bill and you want to leave a 1 and you see 4 ones in the tip jar, what are the rules about that? Should you take the 4 and put the 5 in, or do you not do that? You talk to the barista and make 5 ones out of the cash register.
I want to hear your answer first, AJ.
Okay. I don't mind people doing that as long as they give me a heads up that like, hey, is it cool if I take 4 ones and leave a 5? That's fine. I don't mind that. It's when people just do it without saying anything that it kind of raises an alarm a little bit of like, it's just weird. You're reaching into the tip jar. But as long as you're communicating and you just ask beforehand, that doesn't bother me. But
yeah, I it sets off my alarms if somebody sticks their hand in there without saying anything first. If somebody asks, usually I just don't want to encourage that habit, so I'll usually be like, no, I'll just grab their 5 and change it out for the register real quick. But that's just how I don't want people to get in the habit of thinking they can just like stick their hand in the tip jar and make change, because it feels kind of weird for some reason.
Yeah,
I mean, even though you know they're not
uncomfortable.
You know they're not stealing, it just feels kind of weird.
Yeah.
Do you know
kind of invasive.
Do you know they're not stealing though? Because I have a friend who works at the Starbucks here in Broomfield, and she said once somebody came in and just took all of the money.
Oh yeah, I mean that happens, but I mean the assumption is this is going to be like a regular customer that you kind of recognize, and that even then it's still kind of weird. I don't know.
Okay, so for everyone who's listening that isn't a barista, the proper etiquette is put money into the tip jar. Don't take any out unless you have talked about it.
Yep, good plan.
All right, I'm glad we got that cleared up. Let's see. So now you're a manager at Otis. That seems like a huge job to me. I'm sure you have lots of things to do. It seems like when I see you working, you are multitasking, like actively. Still super pleasant, but I can tell there's a lot going on, like all the gears are turning. So what's your biggest responsibility at Otis?
I would say, I think sort of the biggest and the most overarching responsibility I have is connecting the bridge between our owners, Matt and Cody, and my staff, the team. And basically, I think the way I see it is Matt and Cody do a lot of the long-term strategizing, right? And coming up with the bigger game plan for the next 3 months, the next 12 months, what does the next 3 years look like for the company? And I think that my biggest responsibility, and that all other responsibilities fall under, is synthesizing that sort of strategy and that game plan, and then ensuring that where we are on the day-to-day operations in the cafe is sort of pointing in that direction, and making sure that we're laying the groundwork to move that way. And then on the flip side too, making sure that the vision and the strategy that gets laid out is actually supporting the barista team, and is going to be what's best for us as a group, right? And to sort of balance out that, like, what are the needs of the individual members on the team, and making sure that lines up with where we want to go as a company. And then all the little details sort of fall into place underneath that. So
how many employees are you supervising?
10 at the moment.
And the cafe is open from 7 in the morning till late at night, right?
7 to 7, except for Sundays. I think we close at 5.
Do you do the scheduling?
I do. Yep.
Yeah.
That's
always fun.
It's easily, maybe not the hardest, but it's up there with the most difficult, and like occasionally.
It feels like sitting down and doing the crossword on a particular
That's a good way of putting it. Yeah. It's like doing a puzzle where people's financial livelihoods are at stake.
Yeah.
And where they might be hiding pieces in their pockets unknowingly.
Right. Exactly.
So you don't have a set schedule. You have to sit down and do it like according to people's changing schedules every week.
Yeah. So we have some consistency, and I've tried to implement as much regularity in people's schedules as possible, but it's kind of the flip side of being in the coffee industry, which is people like the sort of spontaneity and the freedom and the wiggle room that it gives you if you work in coffee. And I, love that too. So I try as best as I can to accommodate people's, travel plans, or, hey, I got to go do this, or I got to go do that. And so sometimes it's difficult to make your schedule consistent and reliable week after week.
So when you're meeting with Cody, and I know Cody lives in Seattle now, doesn't he?
Yeah, Cody and Matt both do.
They both do.
Mhm.
Okay. And when you're communicating with them, is it on what kind of basis do you talk with them about business matters?
We actually
Weekly?
communicate pretty frequently. We have a Google Hangout once a week, the three of us. So that's sort of our weekly cafe leadership meeting, I suppose you could call it. And then we communicate pretty regularly and correspond via email. We use Slack as well, which is a great company resource. And I didn't know how it was going to go when I first started this job. When they said, "Hey, you're going to, meet with your bosses via the computer once a week," like they live in a different state. That was such a foreign way of running a business to me that I was a little unsure, I guess. But there's actually been a lot of positives to it. A lot of like autonomy and freedom from my end to really be the one who's leading the cafe. I still have their support and their correspondence very regularly, and they're good about being available and ready to chat and answer questions.
And how often do they actually come into the cafe?
When we were doing the transition to Otis, it felt like they were here every 2 or 3 weeks, probably the month leading up to, and then the month after. But it's about at a point where it's once a month, once every month and a half. They'll come down and spend 3 to 5 days in the cafe and take care of stuff.
So are you always going on runs, like picking up odds and ends that you need for the cafe, or like if you're running out of something, figuring out where to go get it, that kind of stuff?
I feel like if I'm making a lot of runs, I consider something is going wrong, right? Like ideally I should be able to make sure that the inventory is stocked and to be consistently ordering enough that I don't ever have to like do anything reactively and, oh, we're out of this, I got to go run and get that. It should just be that I can anticipate a week out, we're going to run out of this, so I'll order it now. That being said, that doesn't always happen. And that's been a big learning process of keeping really close tabs on what you have and what you need and being as organized as possible with your ordering schedule. And yeah, so there are weeks where it's 2 or 3 times I'm like, oh my gosh, we're out of this, I got to go run and get that. And I try to treat those as little learning processes and figure out what went wrong and where I can improve in the future.
Are we ever going to get oat milk back?
Oh my gosh, the dilemma. I keep hearing that in the first quarter of this year, they're going to be back on a consistent distribution schedule. I will believe it when I see it. It's been the past 3 or 4 months have been very frustrating. Because Oatly, I think, is clearly the superior product in terms of other companies' oat milks. And they did the classic like drug dealer thing. They got you hooked on it and then they pulled it away, right? So now everybody is like clamoring at our gates wanting oat milk. And it's hard to be able to say like, we don't have it and we don't know
coming up. Like every this keeps coming up, and I think like everybody's adding it. Like we had the same dilemma where we added oat milk and put it up on the board, and the customers started having it, and then all of a sudden we couldn't get it anywhere. And we were using Pacific barista, I guess barista blend they call it.
Yeah.
It's I have never tried Oatly, so I'm wondering, have you tried the Pacific kind?
Yeah. So when they ran out of Oatly, our milk distributor said, hey, we don't have Oatly, but we have this Pacific brand. So that's what they've been giving us. And now they can't even give us the Pacific brand. That's like we're coming out empty on all counts on that one. And I think there's one more company that makes it called Minor Figures, something like that. I haven't tried their stuff, but I've heard that they have a relatively consistent distribution schedule.
I think what happened is it just caught on so quick that that every cafe is wanting to get it all of a sudden, and like who knows where in the supply chain it's screwing it. It could even be in the printing.
Yeah,
they just don't have enough. They have to ramp it all up.
Right.
And so I mean, this is called on quicker than anything I've seen. Like quicker than almond milk when that was a thing. And I think it was like because everybody was drinking almond milk, and then that drought in California happened, and everybody became conscious of how much water was used for almonds, and so oat milk became like the most environmentally conscious, and so everybody just like suddenly gravitated towards that.
Yeah, Yeah, it seemed like over the course of a couple weeks, it was nobody had heard of it, and then everybody was drinking it. It was very bizarre.
It's funny how things are like that. Like, you couldn't get me to drink an almond milk beverage. I'm not interested in that at all. But Monica Burton was on the show, and she was telling me about oat milk and how creamy it is. And I was like, no, you can get me somewhere with a creamy explanation. Like, if something's creamy, I will try it. But I'm not trying like a really thin almond milk as a substitute for whole milk. But I switched over completely 100% to Oatly, but not that not Pacific stuff. I like the Oatly only. And I'm going to tell you a secret. It does exist in a store in Broomfield. And my husband found it last week and brought it home, and it is delicious. It's creamy and it's wonderful, but I'm not prepared to say where I found it.
You're not going to say? Oh.
No.
Oh my God. I'll
tell you, like, I'll text it to you, but I'm not going live with it.
That's fair. That's your secret stash. I understand.
I'm guessing Walmart.
It starts with a W. That's all I'll say.
That's what I just.
You do the math.
Interesting.
All right. So I want to talk a little bit about the location of Otis. It's in a strip mall that has recently gone through a grand revitalization, and there's lots of cozy places to sit. It's really, it's thriving. So I'm there at like 7 to 8 in the morning, but if I stay a little bit longer, it is wall-to-wall people. I mean, people are spilling out of the coffee shop and into the atrium in the shopping complex. That place is hopping. So there's a bar kind of across the atrium from you guys. There's a bar and a dinner place called Fate Brewing Company, and it suddenly just shut down all of a sudden. And I guess they weren't paying their taxes, because that's what it says on the paper on the door. But has that affected Otis at all? Like, I know your evening scene was pretty big deal for a while. Has that affected anything for you?
I think less than you would think when you hear something has gone out of business in the same building as you. I think we're still in a process of trying to bolster our cocktail revenue and the amount of money we're doing in the evenings. And I think this is a struggle that a lot of coffee shops face, is that you want to stay open and you want to give more opportunities for more hours for baristas, more opportunity to make money. But coffee is sort of it's a morning person's drink, right? At a certain point, nobody really wants to be drinking espresso after 6 p.m. So a lot of places have turned to this model of doing coffee in the morning and then cocktails or beer at night, which has been successful for a lot of places, particularly in bigger cities. Lafayette is still a little smaller of a town, doesn't have quite the lively night scene that a lot of other places do. So I think we're still trying to push that end of things for us. So we were never super heavy on cocktails, even when Fate was open. I think there was never like long waits at Fate, so people never had the opportunity to say, hey, I'm going to go over and get a cocktail while I wait for my table. I think if people went to Fate for dinner, that's what they did, and then they left. I think more than anything, it's just affected us having, I mean, now we're only one of 2 retail spots that are open in that shopping center. And I think it just has lowered the overall amount of foot traffic that goes in there. Mm-hmm. So maybe we felt it a little bit from that perspective, but I think we're catering to very different crowds, Fate and Otis are. So I think there wasn't a lot of crossover in that way.
Okay. You know what I think you need there is a ukulele jam.
Hey, I think I know the woman to make it happen.
Totally. You know the right person.
I do.
think that's what we need to do. And we would call it something like Sip and Strum.
Oh, see? It's perfect.
I've already thought it out.
we'll
I'll
talk.
text you
We can
about
make it
that
happen.
too.
Yeah.
I'll tell you my super secret stash of Oatly, and we'll do Sip and Strum.
It sounds great.
All right. So on a personal note, I've observed that you take a lot of pride in your work, AJ, and you seem to have this very relaxed management style with all the employees at Otis. People don't have any trouble talking to you about their schedule changes, like right in front of the customers. And that speaks to me of like, what a nice guy you are, because I could see that kind of conversation about a schedule change being something that, you dread having the conversation because, the person's going to get angry. None of that's happening with you. It seems to me like The Otis folks are just friends who are just lucky enough to work together. Like everybody kind of has this really great attitude about helping each other and knowing about each other's personal lives and seeing each other socially outside of the coffee shop and the workplace. Is that just an organic state of matters at Otis? Because I've been observing this for years among people. Or is this something that you are mindfully cultivating as a manager?
I have to give credit mostly to that it's the natural state of Otis, right? Like I walked in on a really solid staff and a group of people that are very thoughtful and very hardworking and compassionate and kind to each other. And that was really encouraging to have happen when I started the job, to know that, you know, it wasn't going to be this Herculean task of trying to get everybody on the right page. And there have been, obviously you have personnel issues that's just unavoidable, but I don't know. I think my personality tends to be less type A than a lot of people, which has its downfall in a management position for sure. But I like to be as supportive as possible to people. And I kind of see my job as trying to make everybody's lives as easy as possible and try to make everybody's work experience as smooth and simple and pleasant as possible. So yeah, I think as much as I would love to take credit for it with my personality, I think it's mostly the people that I work with are really genuinely awesome humans. So they make doing my job a lot simpler, which is great.
That's awesome. Austin, you would describe yourself as less type A too as a manager.
Yeah, and I would say the same thing. Like, yeah, although I have been on the other side when staff is like more in dysfunction. So I think he's right in that, like, you know, if you have a great staff, it makes your job easy. And I feel like that's where I'm at with the staff that I work with right now as well. But I've been in the situation where that wasn't the case before, and it takes a while, like, to crawl your way back from that. I feel like if you make a couple of really good hires that bring the level back up, and then it'll slowly start to get back into that positive space again. And that momentum, when it's a good momentum, like, will kind of keep going.
Yeah.
So right now, yeah, it sounds like you're in a good place, and I'm happy to hear that.
Yeah. And it was cool to start from less than ground zero, right? I didn't have to, I made a couple hires since I started, but for the most part, it's just been sort of tweaking procedures or tweaking customer service approaches, things like that. And they're all pretty minor changes. So it's been mostly just like a really great group of people.
That's awesome. Who are some of the people you've hired? Is it Hannah? She's kind of new, isn't she?
Yeah, I hired Hannah and I hired Matt as well. So those are the only two hires I've made yet. So I'm still
was that hard? Like when you were getting those applications, did you get I know Austin struggles with even finding people.
Yeah.
What's it like in Lafayette? Like, do you get lots of applications?
Ever since Otis happened and we made the transition, we've had a lot of people throwing in resumes. I think just because nothing else like that exists in Lafayette to that extent. We're kind of the specialty coffee shop in Lafayette, if I can be so bold.
Do it. Go there. It's true.
So I think anybody who has coffee on their radar is something that they'd like to do or somewhere they'd like to work. I think they appreciate what we're trying to do in Lafayette. And yeah, for the past 2 months, we've gotten pretty consistent people turning in resumes and stuff. So it's been good to know that I have a pool of people to interview from and to chat with and stuff like that. But yeah, it's definitely difficult. The first time I had no idea what I was doing. Had no idea what sort of questions I was supposed to be asking at these interviews, and what the procedure was like for getting people onboarded and on the payroll and stuff like that. So it was a little scary to start with, but now that I've done it twice, I feel more confident with moving forward and making it happen.
Cool. Well, let's talk about your New Year's resolution, because I know what it is, and it's pretty impressive. So tell us about it.
I don't know that it's that impressive. I've sort of defined it. There's 2 tricks that I want to be able to do on a snowboard by the time that 2019 is done. So that's kind of been what I'm working on this winter.
And they're not just stand up and carve. What are they?
I want to be able to do an ollie, so like a little jump. And then I want to be able to do a nose and a tail press, so like balancing on the front or the back of your snowboard. That's kind of my goal.
While you're going down a slope, you want to go on the nose or on the tail.
Right.
Oh, wow. So how are you doing on that?
I'm okay. I'm doing all right. I had only, before this season started, I had only been snowboarding 3 times. So I was still pretty new. And the first couple days I went out were pretty brutal and unforgiving. And definitely a lot of time spent on my butt and, landing on your wrists, stuff like that. But
I was going to say your butt and your wrist. The one time I did snowboarding, I was like, a lot of falling to those 2 places. Do you get past that?
You do, for sure. But it sucks because when you're in that stage, it's so painful and it's so repetitively painful.
Yeah.
That your whole body is just telling you, just stop, don't do this. There's nothing good can come of this. Just give up. But I've always heard that, I forget who told me this, that the difference between skiing and snowboarding is that skiing is easier to learn and harder to master, whereas snowboarding is harder to learn and easier to master. And I found that to be true. Too. You've heard that too?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So it's like you have this steep learning curve at the beginning where you're just hitting your butt, hitting your wrists, smacking your head. But then at a certain point, it sort of clicks and you start making progress really quickly. And when you break through to that point, it's so encouraging and it's so much more fun, and you're able to actually put some style and some flow into it that, it's just about breaking through that ceiling and just getting past the point where you're falling all the time.
I felt like it took me 5 full days of falling down to get to that point. What was your experience?
The first 3 times I did it were so spaced out that I felt like I didn't make any progress. It was like I did it one season and then I wouldn't do it again for another year, and then I didn't do it again for another year. But when I started this year, the first 2 or 3 days I went out, it was a lot of falling, a lot of catching edges and stuff like that. So I would say 5 days is probably about accurate.
About right.
Yeah.
Which is probably why you always see locals doing it, doing snowboarding. Because like for me, like I get to ski once in a blue moon. So like I'm not going to, like I'm only there for a week. So I'm not going to spend those 5 days like on the bunny slope busting my ass. I'm just going to get on ski, which is I know how to do.
Right. Right. That makes total sense. Yeah. That seems like it kind of feels like a waste of a vacation, right? If you're just smacking your butt all week.
I've always said you got to be a little stupid to be a snowboarder, and I include myself in on that, because you've got to be willing to be bad at it for a long time, and it's a long, painful journey to get to where you can do it. But then once you can snowboard, I mean, I hate to ski now. I'll do it. Like I'll dial it back to teach my cousins to ski or to hang out with somebody who's just bent on skiing, but I don't like doing it. I'd much rather be in my comfy snowboard boots and carrying one thing and not 3 things.
I was going to ask that question actually. Are the boots more comfortable than they are when you're skiing?
Yes.
Oh my gosh.
Those things are cruel.
Yeah.
What you lose in like butt comfort and wrist comfort, you gain in foot comfort.
Okay.
Yeah.
That sounds like a good trade-off actually, because those boots for skiing are horrible.
And it's still not like they're not Uggs or anything like that. There's still some tight points, but compared to those plastic ski boots, it's a whole nother world.
Yeah, it's so much nicer. When I was learning to snowboard, I think day 2, I hit my tailbone on ice, and that's just, you're done. Oof. I'd only been out for an hour and that happened, and I was like, well, now I'm, really done, and I need a chiropractic adjustment and a heating pad. Yeah. And then I went back out like the next week to do my 3rd day, and this time instead of sort of subjecting myself to the elements, I took a kitchen towel and rolled it up and like shaped it like a upside down U and stuck it in my ski pants, like as a padded surface. And I mean, the lifties, the guys who run the chairlift, were cracking up at me. They're like, look at your butt. Remember that song? Like, look at her butt. Anyway, they were all making fun of me. And I was like, you boys can laugh all day long. When I'm falling down, I'm not feeling any of it. So after like day 5, I quit wearing like my homemade butt cushion, but it saved me because, I mean, if you hit too hard, you're done for the day, and then you just wasted a day of your pass.
Yeah, it sucks. It's very, very demoralizing.
It is. Tell me about your pass. You've got like the grand pass of all ski passes.
I do. So I have the Ikon pass, which it's really cool actually. I didn't realize this before I bought it, but it gives you access to mountains all across the US, a couple in Canada, 2 or 3 in New Zealand and Australia, 1 in Chile, which none of these places I'm ever going to make it to, at least this year. But there's, I think, 5 or 6 mountains in Colorado that you can hit as much as you want to. One of them being Eldora, which is great because it's 50 minutes from where I live. So on Tuesday, I went right after my morning shift. So I got off at noon and I was there at 1 and snowboarded for 3 hours and then came home. So it really does make a big difference when you're not weighing the cost of going out for a day. It's already sunk and you can spend an hour there and you haven't wasted any money. And yeah, it gives you a lot of freedom in when you choose to go and how you choose to do it.
And having Eldora in your list of options is wonderful. Eldora, for those of you listening that don't know much about the ski culture here in Colorado, most of the ski slopes involve a very treacherous drive up a sometimes icy and traffic-bound I-70. And so you're going from elevations of 5,280 feet up to like 9,000 and 10,000 feet. And so you've got to climb up this pass and go through a tunnel. And any way you shake it, it's crazy town. And if there is an accident or a delay, it affects people for hours on either side of the road. So Eldora is just up Boulder Canyon. And so it is a quick, easy drive.
Mm-hmm.
And it is just so close. The trouble is the mountains aren't that big. The runs aren't that long. And so it's kind of the underdog of all the slopes in this area. But I love Eldora, just like AJ does. And that's, I think that's more of if you've been around a while, you have that idea about it because you've sat in I-70 traffic.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's hard to beat when you get the chance to go up to Copper or Breckenridge or Winter Park, one of these bigger, more established mountains. I understand why people kind of poop on Eldora a little bit. Like it's definitely smaller, but when you compare it to stuff that's on the East Coast or in Minnesota, it's still a very, very nice place to go and go snowboard. So
yeah, I love it. That's where I learned to snowboard. They have great beginner slopes there with like a magic carpet. And I had another question for you about snowboarding. Are you still falling off the lift?
I didn't for a long time, and then it was last week I had a spill, and it was like surprising. I was like, oh wow, I haven't done that in a while.
You're like, yes, humiliation.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the scariest part though. It's like the stakes are so high and that chairlift could just smack you in the head.
Yeah, or the people behind you, the skiers, could just smack you on the head.
Yeah.
Smugly. They'll do it with smugness.
Well, and everybody gets so upset when somebody falls and like slows down the traffic on the lift, but I mean, everybody does it. It happens to everybody.
It's so true. Do you have like a stomp pad on your snowboard?
I do, and haven't found it. So I've rented my snowboard for this season, so I don't own anything yet. And it's kind of this beat up, worn out stomp pad, so I haven't found it to be super helpful. But I might give another one a try when I end up shelling out for my own board.
Everything changed for me when I figured out the stomp pad.
Really?
They make a product. It's called the Crab Grab, and it's like 2 little pieces of grabby foam that are like this, and so you orient them at the front of your board and then at the back of your board. And when you put your foot on that, you've got like a surface, even when there's snow on it. I don't know how this works. Even when it's snow packed, you've got a surface that like holds your foot in place.
Huh.
So you're not just relying on that rear binding to give you the support. You actually get support underneath, which is where you really need it when you're trying to get out of the way of people.
Interesting.
With that loose rear foot. Yeah. Crab Grab.
Crab Grab. All right. I'm going to look that up.
They're like $10 and they're worth like $1 million.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah. Some guy in Breckenridge recommended it and I went and bought them and it changed my life.
Nice.
So when you do get your board, Crab Grab.
All right. I'll look into it.
All right. Well, is there anything we haven't asked you that you want to tell us about?
No, I don't think so. This has been a very a fun little journey to my coffee history.
Yeah. Yeah, you could say you're famous the world over. People have heard about your pour overs in every country. We've got listeners on every continent right now.
Do you really?
Yes,
Oh, that's awesome.
real. Yeah,
Very
we just
cool.
broke through Africa and Australia within the last 2 weeks. Did you know that,
Very
Austin?
cool.
Did you see Australia?
I didn't know about the Australia part. No, does it say what city?
Not yet. I haven't seen that. I guess we don't have
Very
any
cool.
Antarctica listeners, so technically we're not on all the continents.
Not yet.
Well, if you know somebody on Antarctica, please tell them about our
Recommend you
podcast.
to the ice scientists that are down there.
I mean, they got to be drinking coffee.
Yeah, I mean, what else is there to do?
You know they want to. All right. Well, tell us what are your 3 top favorite coffee experiences?
Ooh. All right, I'll throw out 2 places in Washington and 1 place in Colorado. Place in Washington called Milstead, which was the first place that I had a cup of coffee that I didn't realize coffee could. You have those moments where you're like, oh, I didn't know that coffee could taste like this. That was the first place I had that. They're awesome. A place called the La Marzocco Cafe, which is in Seattle as well. They exist in the lobby of the KEXP radio station, which is like this famous Seattle radio station. And every month they have a different coffee roaster that takes over the shop. So stuff from all over the world, some of the best coffee roasters in the world. And they will come in.
Is that La Marzocca like the espresso machine?
Yes. Yeah. It's their cafe that they installed in this brand new building. Yeah. So every month you can come in and you can try something new, some new roaster you've never heard of, somebody that you've loved, you've tried before. And they train the staff to make all of their drinks the way they like. They completely change around the flow of the bar, change up the drinks. Like it's like a whole new space almost. But it's.
And is that consistent employees, or do they bring in employees from the whatever roastery is going?
I believe how it works is there are people who work at the La Marzocco Cafe, and they get trained by whatever roaster's coming in that month.
Wow. Which
seems like a cool gig, right? To just get that constant influx of information from different roasters, and yeah, it's really cool. So I love that place. And then I'm also very partial to Black Eye, which is a coffee shop in Denver. And that was the first specialty shop I went to in Denver. So I have a little warm spot in my heart for it.
I haven't tried that. Is it downtown?
It is in Highlands, technically, I think. It's north of I-25, sort of close to 20th, I think. My Denver geography is not great. But our old coworker, Allie, who's she works there now. So go say hi.
Okay.
Yeah.
I will. We'll totally. We need to get her on the show. I'm glad you just helped me locate her. That's perfect.
She would be fun. She would be a good guest.
Yeah, I miss her at Otis.
You too. Yeah. He's an awesome person.
All right. Well, I would call that a wrap. Austin, you got anything else to say?
No, I'm really interested in finding out more about this La Marzocca Cafe, though.
Yeah.
I know, and Black Eye. So what we're going to try to do is use the suggestions we get from each podcast interview about favorite coffee shops to reach out to people in those cafes and maybe talk to those baristas. So.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, very cool.
Yeah, because we're running out of people we know.
Yeah, you got to start expanding out.
Exactly. So maybe if you know somebody who's still at Seattle Coffee Works or something like that, you can get us some insight on that, getting them on the show.
I could get you hooked up.
Okay. Well, as we end the episode, we again want to thank AJ for being with us and thank all the listeners for joining us. And remind you that we want to hear from you guys too. If you know a barista or a coffee industry expert who needs to be featured on the show, write to us and tell us whatever your thoughts are. We want to hear them at info@baristaunfiltered.com. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. And we thank you to all the YouTube subscribers, and we want more. So if you've got time to write up a review on Apple's iTunes podcast app or subscribe to us on YouTube, we would super duper appreciate it. That helps us find new listeners. We've got a couple podcast patrons now through Patreon. So if you want to join the cool kids and support the podcast, head on over to patreon.com/barista-unfiltered. And I'll just end with, I'm Jodie Lee.
And I'm Austin Miller.
Y'all be good. Stay caffeinated. Bye.